Have you ever suddenly, it just came into your head, so-and-so is going to call. Someone's going to call me. And then the phone rang and it was them. Or like, how about when somebody says something that you were just going to say, word for word, it comes out of their mouth. That might be telepathy. Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and
I'm Joe.
There are countless, I say, stories of mind reading. Almost everyone has experienced it to one degree or another, and that's generally known as telepathy. So, first of all, I have to say, if you see an ant crawling on my face, tell me, because I have been chasing ants all over my body all day long.
That's so weird. I haven't seen it.
It's because they've moved from the back porch into my room.
Yeah.
The word telepathy comes from ancient Greek. It comes from tele, which means distant, and pathos, which means feeling or perception. So that makes sense, am I right? Telepathy and psychic abilities are often used interchangeably in popular culture, but they actually refer to different phenomena. And we've talked about this before, trying to think, well, is this psychic, or, what's the difference between psychic and telepathy? Mm-hmm. So telepathy specifically refers to the ability to communicate thoughts, feelings, or information from one person's brain to another person's brain without the use of any known human senses or physical interaction. It suggests a direct mind-to-mind communication. In essence, it's the ability to perceive or transmit thoughts between people, between individuals, using means beyond the known senses or conventional.
So it's also transmission, because the etymology would indicate it's just input.
Yeah, just input, like you get a feeling. Psychic ability, on the other hand, is a broader term encompassing a range of paranormal...
So that might also include like clairvoyance.
Yes. So it's a range of paranormal or extrasensory perceptions and abilities. It can include telepathy.
But is that only input? So like, for instance, telekinesis is an output only thing.
That would be under the psychic ability umbrella, because
that would be psychic.
That would be psychic.
Okay, so it's more like telepathy psychic is a mental ability. Telepathy is
communication.
It is psychic, but it is a subclass.
Exactly. So telepathy is a specific type of psychic ability that involves direct mind-to-mind communication, while psychic ability refers to that broader umbrella of extrasensory perceptions and phenomena. When you say somebody's psychic, they could maybe move things, or they could read your mind, or they can see the future.
Wouldn't that also like encompass really completely boring abilities? Like, for instance, you have the psychic ability to know what you are thinking in an hour.
That's idiotic.
I mean, it would, you know what I mean? Like you have the psychic ability to know what something tastes like before you've tasted it.
Okay, we'll get to that. That is
and wouldn't that also be telepathy?
No, there is a thing, and it's actually a physical thing that comes up with that. So the term telepathy was first coined in 1882 by a guy named Frederick W.H. Myers, who founded the Society for Psychical Research. There have been lots of experiments done over the years, but they're usually criticized for lack of controls, and they can't repeat them, which is one of your big things, I know. There's no good evidence, according to science circles, that telepathy exists, and the scientific community refers to it as a pseudoscience, but plenty of people throughout the ages have experienced it in one way or another. In the late 19th century, the magician and mentalist Washington Irving Bishop would perform thought-reading demonstrations. He claimed he had no supernatural power. He said he had super-sensitive muscular sensitivity, that he would read thoughts from unconscious bodily cues. What does that remind you of?
I think we did something like that.
Do you remember a TV show called Lie to Me?
No.
Oh, you used to love it when you were a kid.
Really?
Well, when you were a teenager. It was this detective who was able to read micro-expressions like minute expressions that people
yeah,
had.
remember that.
And so he could deduce if somebody was lying or what the truth was or whatever. And then also the book Blink by Maxwell Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell. Yes, that's it. I was thinking there's a lot of wells in there. And that also talked about microexpressions, because that's a real thing. We are picking up a lot of nonverbal cues from what we observe about body language and, just the slightest twitch of an eyebrow maybe or whatever. So that's probably what that guy was talking about when he said it was muscular sensitivity. He was investigated by the British Medical Journal and a psychologist named Francis Galton. And he was able to perform several things, several of the tasks they gave him to do, and he did them correctly. He identified a selected spot on a table, he located a hidden object, but he had to have physical contact with the person who hid the object or knew the answer. And that was he was picking up some really low frequency movement on their part. I'm sure he was like a human lie detector.
As he said.
Yeah. And he reiterated he wasn't a telepath. He was just highly skilled to detect ideomotor movements. So that makes sense. Okay. This is still that's not telepathy, because he's contacting them, and it's got to be a no contact thing where you're not touching the other person. In fact, it's even better if you're not even in the vicinity of one another. But here's where what you brought up about smells and tastes and stuff, it's actually got a name. It's called hyperesthesia, and it is an abnormal sensitivity to stimuli of the senses. And so if you just get the barest whiff of something, it might stimulate you might be able to tell what that is, whereas a normal person wouldn't even smell it. And maybe that sense is somebody sweating because they're lying, or, something like that. Again, that's not reading thoughts. So that could explain some of these things, but it does not explain them all. If you have an increased touch sensitivity like that guy just talked about, that's called tactile hyperesthesia. If you have an increased sound sensitivity, it's called auditory hyperesthesia. So you can see where that, just being super, super sensitive to it. I think I might have it with temperature.
You can detect minute changes in temperature?
Yeah. Like if I walk by a window, even if the sunshine doesn't hit me, doesn't fall on me, I can feel the temperature change as I walk by the window. And it could be very, very small, because I've tested it with the
temperature reader gun.
Yeah.
I once saw this thing where twins.
Yeah, that's my next section.
Okay.
Is on twins.
Go ahead.
Twin telepathy is a belief. I'm going to go with their language. They say it's a belief that's been described as a myth in psychological literature. Psychologists say that all these experiments on subjects have failed to provide any scientific evidence for telepathy between twins. According to two researchers that I read about, there are various behavioral and genetic factors that contribute to the twin telepathy myth. Identical twins spend a lot of time together. They're growing up together. They're in similar environments. So it's not surprising that they act in similar ways and are adept at anticipating and forecasting each other's reactions or experiences. BS. I don't buy it. Despite all those scientists saying that stuff, so many people, I lost count of how many stories I read, first-person stories of people who are twins and they're telling these different experiences they had, and mothers who have twin children telling those experiences. This goes beyond saying, oh, well, we're raised in the same household, and that's why I knew that she was in the bathroom and needed help. What? No, that doesn't even make any sense. So one of them, and I only wrote down one little quote from one of the twins because I thought this was pretty good. It was Clarissa Adea. I think I'm pronouncing her last name right. She said, I'm a fraternal twin. I'm a girl and he's a boy. When I was younger, my brother had poor speech and didn't talk very often. So whenever he wanted something, he'd just look at me, and without saying anything, I could translate correctly to my parents what he was saying. and he didn't say anything. I think that is probably the most profound one, but there were tons of them where people said, my twin, I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought my twin needed me, and it turned out that they were hurt somewhere, someplace completely other. One lady said she had a stabbing pain in, I think it was her calf, and she couldn't figure it out. It was just really, really awful. And later when she ran into her twin, or her twin came home, the other one had a knife, some freak accident, a knife had stabbed her in her calf. These things, that defies the explanation that you grew up in the same household, you have the same environment.
So it's interesting. I mean, that if those stories happen exactly as they're told, then they're pretty compelling. Though there's one thing that people sometimes do, which I think we've even talked about. It's after the fact, after the event, they woke up in the middle of the night and they ran and got helped their sibling out. After whatever event, then they go back through what happened.
Yes.
And they rewrite it to make more sense, which makes complete sense. You know why your brain would do that. It's possible that even all of the cases are the people, like the person who wakes up in the middle of the night, and maybe they're called somebody just because, or maybe they saw something on the news or something happened and they just forgot about those things, and it turned into...
Okay, I buy that might be some of the cases. But since I can't go and be in everybody's head and know what they experienced and rewind what happened...
That's why you need to become psychic.
The experiences I've had were absolutely not that. I know absolutely without a doubt. How many times has it been that I walked over and picked up my phone and then it rang? My phone doesn't ring that often.
Would that be clairvoyance?
I don't know. I don't know if that's, if I'm getting the communication that somebody wants to talk to me.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah.
Or I have had really strong feelings about the way somebody felt or something they were experiencing, and found out later that I was absolutely accurate. You can think whatever you want to think. You can think I'm rewriting those memories, but I feel very secure in the fact that I am not.
In practical terms, that if it quacks like a duck and it flaps like a duck, it's a duck.
I don't think that's how it goes. It walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
So even if it's you just have a very strong empathetic response and you're seeing muscle movement and you see tiny little variations in the, if the end result is it looks exactly like supernatural telepathy, then you can treat it exactly the same. Though there might be some consistency problems. Like, for instance, if I was an X-Men man, and I had the ability to be telepathic, so I could just walk in a room and look at a person and know exactly what they're thinking every time, then that's a very consistent ability versus maybe the unreliable ability that if I walk into a room, sometimes I get a sense of what a person is thinking. Mm-hmm. Each of those is telepathy, regardless how they function. So what I'm saying is, in practical terms, that literally is telepathy. But the question is, how is that information getting from point A to point B, your brain?
Okay.
And what is the mechanism, how that...
Okay, so let's just suspend your disbelief for a moment. And
I should note, I don't necessarily have a disbelief. It's just, here are the possibilities, and those also include prosaic explanations.
Okay, let's just take this leap of faith. Just take this leap of faith with me. And...
two explanations that are exotic.
Yes. So, is there anything in your scientific background that it could explain how the thoughts in one person's brain could get in another person's brain?
So now you're asking if there's a potential causal mechanism that also is compatible with modern physics and whatever, right?
Yes.
Yes, I think there are some fringe potential ways that an exotic, quote unquote, supernatural explanation is compatible with physics, but I think they're all like a stretch, you know? I mean, beyond that though, as I've said many times, once something supernatural has been well understood, it's not supernatural anymore.
Right.
It's just the regular model of how it works.
Okay, let me throw something out at you. Neuralink.
Yeah.
Okay, they can hook up electrodes in somebody's brain.
Yeah.
And translate whatever it's picking up into commands. Mm-hmm. Where these people can write words, they can make things function. In essence, what they're doing is taking whatever they're picking up in that brain and turning it into thoughts, which then can operate actions, correct? Mm-hmm. So you go back to what is it picking up? Electromagnetic or electric activity, right? Electric activity.
Yeah,
right?
More or less.
Okay, if it's picking up electric activity in the brain, we know that just doesn't dissipate and disappear. Mm-hmm. It is always somewhere.
Interesting. So another topic we've talked about is the butterfly effect.
Yes.
Very highly related. So imagine it's like, okay, the butterfly over here in Brazil or wherever flaps its wings, and over here in Texas, there's a tornado after some time. Can you attribute the tornado to the butterfly? Now consider it's analogous to over here in person B's brain, there's a neuron that fires. Over here in person T's brain, there's a collection of... Mm-hmm. And can you say one caused the other? One big issue with things like this, so small things being detectable by something else, is the effect, just the general effect of the event. So like something happening in your brain that I'm trying to read, is the information from it diffuses out, and it's very difficult to distinguish by an external observer trying to get information about what's happening in your brain or whatever, about what happened. So like, for instance, let's say on your left hemisphere, there's a neuron that could have fired, or in your right hemisphere, there's a neuron that could have fired. If I zoom out, I'm trying to determine just by like a very high quality image or whatever, which one happened. The farther out you go, the likelihood that you can be correct, that you can correctly predict which it was, they even out to almost nothing. And that's the loss of meaning. So like, for instance, there were two butterflies, one in Brazil, one in India or whatever. And in Texas, there was a tornado. Which butterfly caused the tornado? And so really, I mean, it's an issue.
Yeah.
Consider this. I walk into a room and I know I'm psychic, and I get a message and it's someone's thoughts, but there are two people in the room. Which one thought the thoughts? Is it a combination of both of them? Is it one? If I'm just in my house and I hear a thought, who did it come from? And as you lose details like who it came from, where they are, which direction, whatever, as you lose those particular details, that's when you're losing the meaning of, and that's why it becomes less useful.
I agree with you. But let's just flip that on its head. Uh-huh. So you lose the details, you lose the meaning, but screw the details, there's meaning. Uh-huh. Just ignore those details. There's meaning. Because if you have an experience like that, you have had meaning. Mm-hmm. Whether it's something that somebody else is going to give value to or not.
So there's like this really interesting difference between individual events and statistics about events. Really, really interesting, because you can have those two things be like diametrically opposed. For instance, here's a practical example I love to consider in this case. Let's say that everyone stops at stop signs. And let's say then I say, okay, it's perfectly safe to go through the stop signs. They're all four-way stops, so it's perfectly safe for me to go through the stop sign anytime I do it. Anytime I encounter a four-way stop, it's safe because everyone else will stop. And the individual event is me going through. The statistics about the events says the opposite, essentially. Like, no one else will go through. On average, no one will go through. The individual event, I go through. And so, in cases like, here's another example that's more related to like supernatural stuff. Let's say, like just from a conscious perspective, you can't be really sure anything or anyone else exists. It's like I think, therefore I am thing. Mm-hmm. That you can be sure you exist, more or less, but you can't be sure anything else is really happening or anyone else exists or whatever. That's why solipsism, the idea that you are the only thing that exists, is a really undecidable problem. You can't really be sure that it's not true. So here you have again the individual case, you, and the case of statistics. So you look at other people and you say, okay, here's some statistic. The average person is conscious, just like me. Whereas you have this individual case. Let's say you go to sleep and you have a dream, and it's like super hyper lucid dream. You're just plop down into a different reality and you have an experience. Individually, so on a personal level, it has a lot of meaning, right? Mm-hmm. Statistically has no meaning, which is funny because it's like going through the stop sign. It has meaning that I have not stopped at the stop signs. But statistically, it has no meaning. Because if there's a quadrillion people who follow this one behavioral policy, one person going through the stop sign, it doesn't affect the mean or anything at all. So when we're talking about like world models and communicating with other people, we are implicitly we are using a base of common knowledge that we're not talking about really our true individual experiences. We're talking about more or less the average experience. So like if I went to a huge group of people and I said something like, I'm telepathic, then it's a different kind of thing proving it to that crowd versus proving it to yourself.
Right.
Proving it to yourself is very easy. You just go and have a telepathic experience. Mm-hmm. But when you then talk to other people, you're converging on what has to be statistically true or statistically common. It has to be common. Mm-hmm. So the butterfly thing, that is the main jargon for that is entropy. Entropy is basically you look at something, you look at like a situation like here's a tornado, and you have a bunch of different possibilities what the whole system looks like. Here's a butterfly that caused it, here's a butterfly that caused it, here's a butterfly that caused it. And you just kind of look at the number of possible whole systems. So you know some of it. You know some of the information about the system. There was a tornado. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to figure out how much do I really know? And so you know there could be a butterfly over here, a butterfly over there, could have been a blade of grass over here, whatever. The more possibilities there are, the less you actually know about the whole system. When the entropy increases, you know less about the whole system, even though you know something about the system as a whole.
Okay. So, I'm going to look up entropy definition and read it because...
So I can also explain, like thermodynamically, you make an observation about something like a thermodynamic system. So like you have a balloon of gas. You're making an observation. That is some statistics about the system. The observation is very simple, but there's a lot of different possibilities how it looks on a micro scale. So that's like the positions of the particles and whatever. When the entropy of the balloon increases, it means there's more possible underlying realities that make the balloon appear the way it appears.
Okay. You're a scientist, and what you just said is a very scientific explanation, but this is what this says.
Okay.
A lack of order or predictability, a gradual decline into disorder.
Yeah, so consider the butterflies and the tornado. A very ordered, well, not ordered, but order implies you know the order, and that's the important part. You have a tornado. You know that there was a tornado. You don't know the cause. A very ordered, quote-unquote, system would mean you know the cause. The butterfly caused the tornado. A very disordered, quote-unquote, system would be you're not sure which one caused the tornado.
Right.
More entropy means the less confident you can be what the whole system actually looks like. The whole system is this butterfly caused this tornado, or that butterfly caused this tornado, or whatever. For telepathy, it's the same sort of thing. I mean telepathy regardless the cause, whatever,
however you're getting the information.
Yeah, regardless the way you're getting the information. Because it might be something doesn't require any modification to our common world model, which is basically standard physics. It's basically like if there's something going on in your brain, from my perspective, there's many possible different configurations of your brain right now. If I'm somehow getting a particular image of what's going on in your brain, then that means there's a low entropy process connecting between our brains. And since typically what happens is a physical process, the information it's producing just diffuses. Like, for instance, heat. The exact configuration of particles as they're moving around, it just diffuses. You're not sure which configuration or like I twitch in this particular way, and you think, okay, that means, X, Y, Z. So there's the telepathic thing. But maybe I just have Tourette's,
But if you're not in the same physical space, of course, you're not going to see those.
And it becomes
cues.
more difficult the more removed you are.
I still think that the Neuralink thought that came to me when we were talking about that comes back to what is thought. What happens to a thought once it's thought? Where does it go? Where does the energy, and I know you hate that word, but where does that go after you think it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. If you're like God, you look at a person's like brain or whatever. So there's like everything they are, as far as we know, and all the information about their memories and everything. If you have just a perfect image of everything right now, you might, depending on how the universe actually works, you might be able to just simulate it ahead and know exactly where that it goes. So they die and the information is still there. Theoretically, if you had a complete picture, everything, you could know exactly what the information was in the person's brain. Theoretically, now this is a very fringe thing we're over time, but this is a very fringe thing that I've considered before. Very interesting. And it goes like this. You have an information space in your brain. That's the information contained within your brain. Okay? That's like the thoughts you're thinking. Your mental activity as it relates to concepts and in your mind. Okay? Information space. Presumably it's being hosted by your brain. So that information is in your brain. It's encoded in your neurons or whatever. But consider if the information space, which is a kind of abstract thing, the entropy in that information space, so that how ordered it is disconnected from the actual ordering of the actual degree of order of your brain. So the entropy of those two things are disconnected. That's really interesting because we know that if you had a complete snapshot of like a dead person laying in the ground, then, and like everything, all of the light sphere that encompasses the time that they've since they've died. And theoretically, maybe you could reconstruct the information in their brain right before they died. But theoretically, the information space is still evolving. So that means the information in their brain, which has diffused out, is actually still evolving.
Okay, but you just said it. It diffused out.
Yeah.
Where did it go?
See, this is the problem. We think, oh, it went here, but the information actually went everywhere, and that's the issue.
And it's like a frickin' radio wave.
Yeah.
And so I tune into your radio frequency, and I'm going to hear your station.
So what I'm saying with this concept is, if the information space, for instance, I'm just using death as an example, the information space in a person's brain after they died remains in some way well ordered, which might look very strange physically. I mean, it might be literally impossible to model, but if it remains well ordered, you could conceivably, using some also very complex mechanism, pull ordered information from it. So that has very strange consequences. So it's not just like, oh, this person died, you can get information from it. It's like there may be other crazy information spaces contained within like weird things that also have like coherent information you can get out of them. Like, here's a balloon. And in that balloon, there's an information space that is simulating a person that never was alive. You know? So,
oh, you just want to give me nightmares.
And the point of all of this is me saying, even in the case that the information from someone's brain is just diffusing out or whatever, and it's all the physics of it is standard, it's nothing weird is going on, you might potentially still be able to extract information.
Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.
Dun dun. You can't imagine someone else running.